Hello, everyone. I'm Athra Mothher, the Judith Bresler Fellow at the Center for Art Law, and I'm so happy to welcome you to the Visual Artist Immigration Clinic, our first clinic of 2022. I would like to thank our network of volunteer attorneys without whom these sessions would not be possible. And before I introduce our keynote speaker for today, let me tell you a little bit about the Center for Art Law. We are a Brooklyn-based research and education nonprofit, and we are dedicated to offering resources and programming to advance a vibrant arts and law community. Through our website, newsletter, events, we share information and keep our audience updated on art law-related news, events, programs, and a lot more, including art law movies, podcasts, and even TV shows. We also hold clinical events such as ours today to connect artists and attorneys together to guide them in certain areas of law. I would encourage you to take a look at our website, subscribe to our newsletter, and consider becoming a premium member to know more about what we do. We also would love for you to follow us on social media, on our Instagram, where we visit tons of exciting galleries and museums across the globe. We have some exciting posts on an immersive digital art experience coming this week as well. We have a workshop on provenance research, licensing negotiation, a clinic on estate and legacy planning, and also another immigration conversation, which will be our first in-person event after a while at the National Arts Club in April. You can see all these events on our website soon. A few housekeeping items. The keynote presentation is being recorded for archival purposes, but we would love to see you, so please feel free to keep your camera on. To those of you who have registered for a consultation session, we will begin at 4 p.m. and assign breakout rooms for the session. After the event, we will be sending across a handbook for the clinic that contains information about immigration and visas, linked to helpful resources and articles, as well as the bios of the attorneys who are with us today. If you have any questions for our speaker during the presentation, please feel free to post them in the chat box. Now, finally, let me introduce our keynote speaker for today. Sanjay Sethi serves as Artistic Freedom Initiative's co-executive director, overseeing the coordination of its advocacy programs and legal services. His commitment to human rights is rooted in his background as an attorney in asylum and refugee law, and his prior work with various United Nations agencies and international NGOs. In addition to his role at AFI, he is also the co-founder of Sethi Mazaheri, a law firm dedicated to immigration and asylum law. He's also a former prosecutor and served as a law clerk in criminal court for the Superior Court of New Jersey. He's admitted to practice law in New York, New Jersey, and Washington, D.C. So without any further ado, I'll let Sanjay begin his presentation. Sanjay, the Zoom screen is all yours. Thank you.
Great, and thanks so much to the Center for Art Law, and Atreya, thank you as well for that kind introduction. I've been an immigration lawyer for, I think, well over 10 years in my dual capacity as the partner for Sethi Mazaheri and the co-executive director for Artistic Freedom Initiative. And amongst the things we do for the Artistic Freedom Initiative, we do a lot of artist visas for individual artists who are at risk, censored or persecuted in their home countries, and do a significant amount of pro bono work. Always, whatever talk I'm giving or whatever conference I'm on, always want to just remind people, if you know an artist who's censored or persecuted in their home country and may qualify for one of these visas, our nonprofit does a lot of great work in this area, and we would be extremely happy to help these artists out, and you can forward their application to us and we'll be happy to take it on. But let's get into the visa options. If you want to go to the next slide, there's a bunch of different visas for artists, a bunch of different potential ones. And they can be a little bit confusing, and it really helps to analyze what's the best option for you. They all have their pros and cons. They all have their limitations. And then there's the individual qualifications for the visa itself, which vary according to the type of visa. The most traditional one, which is the one that I'm going to start with, is the O visa for individuals of extraordinary ability. So the O visa is a non-immigrant visa. It does not offer permanent residency, but it offers artists the ability to come in the United States and work on their craft. And work on their craft full-time for 3 years and automatically renewable, or I shouldn't say automatically, as long as the standard continues to be met over time. So the visa specifically is for individuals with extraordinary ability in the arts, which includes the film and television industry. Now, there's a nuance. The film and television industry, it has the same basic standard, but there's some new rules recently that are important for individuals in that industry to pay attention to as they think about their qualifications for the visa. There's no annual limitation to the number of visas that's granted, which is great. That's better than the H-1B, which has a limitation every year. And it applies really to a wide variety of fields. There is no set definition for art or the artistic practice that qualifies for this field. It can encompass a lot of different professions. It could be a chef, it could be an architect, it could even be a university professor who works in the arts. Now, that may not be the best option for a university professor, but it even applies to that position. And all different types of media and all different forms. This is a non-exhaustive list, but if there's any doubt on whether you meet the qualification for an artist itself, you can always talk to a lawyer. You'll have the consultation sessions available to you today if that's something that you wanted to discuss. Now, if we go to the next slide, the criteria for the O1 visa of extraordinary ability. Now, there's one easy way to get there, which is to have received or be nominated for a national or international award, like an Academy Award or an Emmy or a Grammy. Now, I've been doing this for a long time. Less than 1% of my cases involve this one-off award. This is not really something that applies to most artists for very understandable reasons, but it doesn't mean that they're not extraordinary artists. So I think it's important to just keep that in mind. You'll see that single category, but really most people need to go the route of the next 6 categories. So you see those 6 criteria, you need to meet at least 3 of them in order to qualify for the O visa. These are nuanced categories. They are not perfectly drawn. They're actually quite imperfectly drawn. And a lot of times an attorney will be able to help determine whether you meet these categories, but we'll go into some of the nuances today, and hopefully that'll give you an idea of what works and what doesn't work. Category 1 is an artist who has performed or will perform services as a leading or starring participant in a production or event that has a distinguished reputation. Now, I'm going to go to these terms in a second, leading or starring and distinguished reputation, but this one is for a production or an event. So you think about an actor or a musician that participates in a leading role for an event that's distinguished. Now, that could be an important play, a big concert, a really important artistic exhibition. And like I said, I'll go into those terms leading and distinguished in a second. The second category is national or international recognition for achievements through critical reviews via published material. Okay, so anytime that an artist has been reported on in news media, I think the general rule is that the journal or newspaper be very reputable. So like a New York Times, Washington Post, Times of India, whatever the country is, but a major publication or a niche publication that has authority in the field. So if it's the Visual Arts Art Forum or something to that effect. Every individual artistic field has their go-to niche publications. Those also are important as well because they have a specialty in determining, what artist is really achieving on a high level. The third one is leading, starring, or critical role for an organization or establishment that has a distinguished reputation. So this should look familiar. This is like category 1, leading, starring role, distinguished reputation. But this one is for an organization or establishment rather than a production or event. So you can think of a cultural worker that works at a museum, that works at the Met. That's not an event, that's an organization. but I think it's an organization we can all say that has a distinguished reputation. And if that person is in a leading role in that institution, that would be a very, very easy category for that person to get. The next category is an artist that has a record of major commercial or critically acclaimed success. So yeah, that kind of is just what it means: commercial, box office sales, that sort of thing, or if it's music, records sold, or I guess in the modern age, downloads. And then critically acclaimed, it would be positive reviews in the media from either niche media or well-established international media. So the next category is significant recognition from organizations, critics, government agencies, and recognized experts. This is important because this is where you can kind of curate your application. You'll hear with O visas that there's a lot of people who include testimonial letters. So they ask their colleagues to write recommendation letters, for lack of a better way of putting it, but really they're expert letters. And if you feel like you qualify for this visa and have some of these categories, this could be a good opportunity if you know some experts in the field. So if you're a visual artist and you get the head of the MFA program at Columbia University to write you a letter, that person should be considered a recognized expert. Then you can meet this category that way. Critics, critical reviews in the newspaper, which we talked about. Government agencies sometimes can write a letter recognizing somebody. So if an embassy recognizes an artist, an embassy from a particular country, that could work. Or an organization, if an organization puts their weight behind you and a Met writes a letter that, you know, we exhibited X artist's work, and you know, we feel like they're a significant luminary in the field. And lastly is high salary or other compensation. This is the category that nobody really gets, because especially younger artists, salaries are really not a part of the game. But this is the type of category where if you know it if you qualify for it. If somebody's receiving a high salary, they'll know that they're receiving a high salary for their work. If we go to the next slide, what is distinguished? How do you show something has a distinguished reputation, a production or event? Critical reviews. You can use testimonials. So if you have recommendation letters, your recommenders can say, this was a distinguished event. So if it was a guitarist and there is a music professor who writes a letter that a certain artist was in a leading role in the most important guitar festival in the country, they can help establish the distinguished reputation. And trade journals, like the little niche publications. Going to the next slide, what is a leading, starring, or critical role? And this can vary depending on the artistic discipline. Some are totally understood. Main exhibiting artists. This is super important for the O visa for any visual artists or painters out there. Really, solo exhibitions are really what you want to show. If you're a director or producer on a small film, and that small film wins an award, well, you know, it's not going to be very hard to show that you're a leading, you played a leading role. Company CEO or founder, this is good for fashion brands or the visual arts designers, things like that. Lead singer in a band that has a good reputation, a composer, playwright. Some of these things need to be argued. One I remember is a book illustrator. We would argue that a book illustrator is a critical role depending on the type of publication it is. Or a group exhibition, if you played an important role within that group exhibition. So if we go to the next slide, the other important feature of the O visa is you need to have a petitioner. You cannot self-petition. Somebody has to petition for you. That can be a US entity, it must be a US entity, but that can be a person or a company. Now, aside from that, you need to show an agreement, a contract of some sort with the petitioner. And then you have to fill out the forms. You know, we don't need to go into those. Those are easily available online, but the 129 form is the key form. But the important distinction here is what kind of petitioner. Now, there's a couple you can go with, and the two principal ones are employer. So if the artist is employed full-time, like a traditional job with an employer, that is one type of petitioner, the employer petitioner. And the other one, which is much more common, is the agent, and which primarily we think of as an agent on behalf of multiple employers. You could have a hybrid category, but I think most importantly is the agent on behalf of multiple employers. So if you're an actor and you have a number of films you're working on, you can't have one of them petition for you because you're not going to be able to work for the other ones necessarily. Instead, what you have is you have an agent stand in, the agent contracts with all the other employers, and the agent is the petitioner. And then you just need to show the contract between the agent and the other employers. This applies to the visual arts as well. A lot of artists exhibit at a bunch of different places, have a bunch of different contracts. And that brings us really to the next slide, because if you're going with that agent on behalf of multiple employers, you need to show an itinerary. So you can get your visa for up to 3 years, but if you only show 2 years of events, you're only going to get it for 2 years. So what do these things need to look like? Well, if you look at, I don't know, it's small writing if you can see it, if you look at the chart on the bottom, you see first deal memo. Well, the deal memo could be a traditional contract. It could be the summary of an oral agreement, or it can even be an email thread. Okay, for any lawyers out there, lots of different things can constitute a contract. But what's important is that there's terms discussed and agreed upon. You have to have a start date, an end date. There has to be compensation listed in there. It can't be free. The venues have to be identified. You need to know who the employer is. So who the agreement is between the agent and whatever that employer is. So different galleries, different organizations, and then the basic terms. They have to describe the work to be done. So if you go to the next slide, other things you want to keep in mind, arts versus motion picture industry, there's an important January 2022 memo where new forms of media can be included. Immigration is very slow to move. So on a lot of petitions in the past in the film industry, they wouldn't count YouTube, they wouldn't count different types of streaming media, which is ridiculous, but they've remedied it now with a policy update. So online content in the motion picture industry can apply. You need to get a consultation letter, okay? Now, you don't have to be paid like an H-1B, a minimum wage. You can really be paid any wage unless it shouldn't be absurdly low. But you need to get a consultation letter. So for example, if you're a director, you need to get a letter from the Directors Guild of America confirming that your petition documentarily qualifies for the visa. I could only really remember one time in the last 10 years that the peer or labor group did not think that the petition qualified. So generally speaking, if you have a lawyer who did their due diligence, generally speaking, they're going to sign off on it, but you have to include it. We had discussed testimonials already, but it's important to include them. They do give them diminished weight compared to 5, 6, 7 years ago, but it's still important to include them. You can bring in other people on your O. So if you're a musician and you have other members of the group, they can come in under an O2. If you have family members, they come in under the O3. There's change of status. Please excuse the typo there. There's change of status for those who are here. And then there's consular processing for the artists who are abroad. Now, for the artists who are abroad, please note, the embassy is going to adjudicate the O visa again. So even though you got approved by USCIS, it doesn't mean that the consulate is going to approve the O visa. They can look at it again and deny it. Generally speaking, that doesn't happen. Every now and then, something like that can happen and your lawyer would have to fight it. Premium processing is for a quick turnaround. If you want an answer in 15 days, you have to pay $2,500 to USCIS. Otherwise, the base filing fee is $460. The consultation letters can run from $250 to $350, and there are other miscellaneous costs that are associated with the application that are listed there. So going to the next type of visa, let's take a look at the EB1. So the EB1 is for permanent residency for artists. And permanent residency has its obvious advantages. You can do whatever you want. If you're a permanent resident, unlike an O visa holder, you can only work in your profession. If you're an artist on an EB1, you can be a bartender, you can be an IT worker, whatever it is you want. But obviously the standard is higher. You also don't need to have a prospective employer. You do have to show that you have enough contacts that it's clear that you're going to continue to work in the chosen field. And you also have to show that your work will benefit the United States. These are general requirements, which I'll go into in more detail in the next slide. Generally speaking, you have to show that you're one of a small percentage of artists who have risen to the top of the field. That's a general requirement. You don't have to statistically prove that or anything like that. The evidence just has to indicate that you're a person of extraordinary ability that belongs at the top of the field. But there's two ways to get there, and this should be familiar: one-time achievement, very rare, major international award, or 3 of the 10 criteria, which we will go to in the next slide. So these are the first 5 for the qualifications for the EB1. I'll give it a second to change the slide to go to qualifications. Yes. So lesser nationally or internationally recognized prizes or awards for excellence. So to show this, you really have to show, you don't have to show that it's the biggest award in the universe, but sometimes there are a lot of awards, for example, in the visual arts that are open to competition within a country. And if you have a series of these awards, they can cumulatively establish this category. So if you don't have one of those big ones, it doesn't necessarily matter if you can show a lot of lesser known but still important prizes in your field. The second one is a rare one. It's membership in associations in the field which demand outstanding achievements of their members. So if you're a fashion designer and there's an association of fashion designers, and in order to get into that association, they have to see that you're a person that is well established in the field and a record of achievement, you can get this category. But generally, it's a tough one to get. Published material in professional or trade publications or other major media, very much like the O. So major publications or niche publications. Category 4, if you've been asked to judge the work of others, either individually or on a panel. So if you're an artist, a visual artist, and you've been asked to be on a jury, and as a part of that jury, you are deciding who wins a particular art award, and you're evaluating the work of others, that can get you this category. So the 5th category is original artistic contribution of major significance to the field. This is where the testimonials can come in. If you have good testimonials from experts in the field that show that your work is original and making a real impact, that can make a difference. In the past, you could have gotten there just with testimonials. You really can't do that nowadays. They've gotten tough with testimonials. So it's good if you have supplementary evidence, for example, published material about you that also establishes that you're making a significant contribution. So if we go to the next slide and the next 5 qualifications. Authorship of scholarly articles. This applies a lot to academics, obviously, but if you have an academic component to what you do, if you're a director, but you're also an expert in film heritage and you write academic articles about that, that can get you this category. Then artistic exhibitions or showcases. If you're an artist, this is kind of the low-hanging fruit. If you're an artist and you feel like you qualify for this visa, you've been exhibiting. But it's not just visual artists. Showcases work for musicians. If there's events showcasing somebody's music, concerts can be looked at as showcases. If you're a composer and different orchestras are performing your work, that can count on as showcases. The next category, again, should be familiar to you: leading or critical role in distinguished organizations. That's basically the same as the O. And then the next 2, high salary or remuneration, very rare in the field, but if God bless you if you have it. And then the last one is commercial success, which would just be sort of ticket sales or sales of any sort. The last thing is Kazarian. This is important too to understand because you can't just technically meet 3 of the 10 criteria and then get home safely. So for example, say you're a visual artist and you had 1 exhibition and you served on a jury once, and then you had 1 article written about you, and that's it. You haven't accomplished anything else. they're going to also look at the totality of the evidence and make sure that you're operating at the top of the field. So you have to have a pretty full record. Again, I don't want anybody to think that this is impossible. If you have a robust career, lots of exhibitions, a few regional awards, some publications about you, you really may qualify for this. But you can't just barely meet the definition of 3 categories and get across the line. If we go to the next slide, I'll briefly mention a couple of alternatives. Those are the 2 principal artist visas, but there are some alternatives. One is a P3 visa, and a P3 visa is available for artists who want to perform, teach, or coach in the US, and it can apply to individuals or groups. A lot of bands come in on the P3, but it's got to be culturally unique. Not just the program, but the artist itself has to have a culturally unique element. We did one for, which is Iraqi maqam singer. This was the only person who performed this type of music in Iraq. Culturally unique. Program was taking place in the US. It was featuring this kind of music, and the artist himself was culturally unique. So that was an easy case of somebody who qualified for this visa. You got to put an itinerary together. It's 1 year, and it's fairly renewable. The O is better, but this may be more appropriate for some people, especially ones who really desire short-term stays. And finally, if we go to the next slide, is the H-1B. The H-1B, most people think of as a tech worker visa, but it's really specialty occupation. So a specialized area that requires some degree of talent. You have to have a bachelor's or higher or substituted experience, which would be 12 years. You have to have an employer sponsor you. It's got to be a full-time or a part-time job, but there's got to be like an employment contract or employment relationship. You have to enter into a lottery, and only then can you apply. So it's very limited. You don't see a ton of artists come on this. Some area of the arts, you'll see it like in the fashion industry, but it's not an ideal option for many artists, but it is an option nonetheless for artists who can meet the qualifications. And listen, these are 4 different options, but it can be confusing. It's a pretty quick review of these options with some meaningful detail for artists, but really oftentimes it's helpful to have an attorney guide you on what that option is. And unless you won a major award, it is really helpful for you to have a lawyer argue for you, because it is a persuasive case that needs to be made. And that's what we're getting to now, in a little bit, when the opportunity is there to consult with a lawyer and maybe determine if there is a path forward for anybody who feels like they may qualify for one of these options. But thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. But the questions should probably be a little bit more general rather than specific to your case.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sanjay, for your presentation. We do have a couple of questions. One of them, on an average, how long does it take to prepare the O1 application? And how far in advance of the start date do you think you can submit an O1 petition?
Yeah, so it takes it depends on the firm. It takes us about 2 months to put together an O petition, but the time is often determinative. It's often determined by the artist. So are they going to get us the evidence we need right away, or is it going to take some time? And for understandable reasons, sometimes it does take time. Translations take time. So if the documents are in Chinese and we have to get them translated, and if the research has to be done a little bit in another language, that can delay a case a little bit. On average, it's 2 months. Now, in terms of how long you need to wait, it depends. If you have the 15-day premium processing. So in that circumstance, that's pretty easy. Just make sure it's like maybe a month out from that 15-day period, and then you'll be okay. O visas are taking, non-premium processed O visas are taking anywhere from like 2 months to 12 months. And I can't give you any rhyme or reason why that time varies so much. I mean, we had some O's approved recently. We were just surprised. We didn't premium process them. They got approved really quick. and we have ones that we're literally waiting over a year on. So it's a hard question. In my opinion, the way it should be looked at is maybe 6 months, because it'll maybe get them to make a decision sooner. And then if you're approaching that 6 month and it's a really important contract, you could upgrade it to premium processing. So if you're getting closer to that date and you're worried you're not getting an answer, you could just upgrade it.
All right, thank you. And a couple of questions with regard to the H-1B visa. Are there specific dates for filing the application for the H-1B?
Yeah, so you have to enter the lottery in March. They changed the date. I believe it's March 1st to 18th that you have the window to enter the lottery, but don't quote me on that. I'm not an H-1B lawyer. So then you get news on whether you're in the lottery, and then about roughly April, if you got selected, then you would apply by April-ish, and then you'll find out in October. So with the H-1B, you'd want your job to start before October. You would want it to start in October.
All right. And are there any exceptions or exempted categories under the H-1B that you could apply for?
Exempted from the lottery?
Yes.
Yeah, there are a few. Well, one is if you're masters, you're not exempted from the lottery, but you are you're not subject to the cap. Basically, it means that it's more likely you'll be selected if you have a master's. So that's good. I mean, it's not 100% chance, but it's more likely than if you just had a BA. The other is the nonprofit exemption. So if you have a nonprofit applying for you, then you're not only exempt from the cap, but you're exempt from the time that you file. So you can file any time. With masters, you still have to file at the normal filing time, March, April. But if your sponsor is a nonprofit, then you can apply any time of the year. There may be an exemption, another exemption I'm forgetting about, but again, I don't do H-1Bs.
All right, perfect. I think those are all the questions that we have. So thank you so much, Sanjay, for your presentation and for answering these. I'm actually on my F1 visa now and also thinking about the H-1B. So I know I found this very helpful. And I think it also sets a strong base for the next part of our clinic. So thank you. We really appreciate you being here with us today.
Great. Thank you, everybody, and good luck moving forward. And if you need my email, I don't know if you can send it to the participants. You can reach out to me anytime, and I'd be happy to talk to you or email with you if you had a specific question on your case.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sanjay. And thank you to all of the participants for attending the session. We appreciate your participation and questions. We hope to see you at other center events.